Welcome to the Reach Personal Branding Interview Series.
Hello, listeners from around the world. This is Ryan Mickley, the executive producer of the Reach Personal Branding Interview Series, welcoming you to the November 2013 interview. Our distinguished guest today is Jay Gronlund. Jay will be discussing his new book, Basics of Branding, with William Arruda, founder of Reach and the Reach Personal Branding Interview Series. I would like to remind our listeners that we do offer sponsorship opportunities for this interview series. If you're interested in sponsoring one of our upcoming interviews, please email advertising@reachcc.com. Again, that's advertising@reachcc.com. We invite you to join the conversation on Twitter and tweet about this interview using the hashtag ReachINT. Again, that's hashtag ReachINT. Jay will take questions from listeners at the end of the hour, so please email me your questions at ryan@reachcc.com. Again, that's Ryan, R-Y-A-N, @reachcc.com. William, the floor is all yours.
Great. Thank you, Ryan, and thanks all of you for joining us today. We're really delighted to have Jay Gronlund, who's going to help us talk about this topic of branding. I know we spend a lot of time talking about personal branding and all different elements of building your brand on the web and social media and uncovering your brand and knowing your personal brand identity system. And we're going to take it up a notch and go back to branding, because there are so many misconceptions about what branding is and why it's important, and the whole field of branding has really evolved, and Jay's new book on the basics of branding is going to be one of those guides that's going to help anybody who wants to know anything about branding and really kind of set the scene for what it's all about. So let me tell you a little bit about Jay, and I'm not going to read you his bio. You all have that. You've received that before, but I will tell you, Jay reached out to me, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago in New York, just to connect, knowing that we were branding colleagues living in the same city. And we did, and instantly I realized, Jay, he is as passionate about the topic of branding as I am, and we instantly, had more to talk about than we could. And I don't know if you remember, Jay, but one of our first meetings, we were supposed to meet at the Yale Club next to Grand Central, and I got there a little early, and they sent me up to the restaurant, and you were waiting for me downstairs. And for some reason, I only had your office number, so I was calling, trying to find out where you were, and you thought I wasn't showing up, and we ended up not even meeting that day. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember. It was so embarrassing.
Well, I don't know how embarrassing it was. I felt really badly that we weren't able to connect. But so welcome, Jay. We're thrilled to have you today for this month's interview.
Well, thank you, William. I look forward to this. And I should add that not only were we on the same wavelength in terms of talking about branding, but it was really exciting every time we met, because we kind of, built on each other's knowledge and passion, and to come up with new ideas for our business development. We kind of fed each other, and it was just really, fun and very productive.
Yeah, I thought so too. So finally, after all this time, we get to introduce you to the rest of the Reach community. So let's start at the top with branding. And so tell me a little bit about your definition of a brand and how we should look at this topic of branding.
Well, it's interesting, because one of the reasons why I wrote the book, and I actually start the book by talking about the misconception of branding. It's really discouraging. I've heard so many senior executives say, "Oh, we have a problem. No one's buying our product. Our consumers don't acknowledge us, or sales are falling down," or whatever it is. And they say, well, we have to rebrand ourselves. We have to come up with a new look, a new name, a new logo. And I say, well, that's important, and it's part of branding, but it's not branding per se. What you should really do is go back and ask yourself, what does my company, what does my product stand for? What am I promising to my customers, my target customers? What am I all about? What is my value proposition? Because branding is all about offering your customer something that's distinct and relevant and ideally compelling, so that they form some kind of bond with you. It's all about connecting with your customer. And that should be established first, and that should lead to any kind of change in the logo or the name. So I treat branding from a strategic perspective, coming up with the what do you want to offer, what kind of message or impression you want to make with your target customer. That's the key to branding in my mind.
Well, I'm delighted you say that, because this is something that I bump up against all the time, where a brand is really synonymous with a logo. And people don't realize that it's that core kernel. Everything is impacted by the brand. And I think that branding was something that was actually easier to manage as a company, 10, 20, 30 years ago, because it pretty much all of the communications that were about a company were managed by the company. Employees didn't really have any kind of external face related to the company. And so I think it was easy for companies to manage their brands, whereas today, with social media, with all employees being representatives of the brand, they all have LinkedIn profiles associating themselves with the brand they work for, with customers providing, their reviews and their comments and complaints publicly for all of us to see. Managing brands has really changed. So how do brands exist and thrive in this new world?
Well, that's a really good insight. The marketing world has changed dramatically over the past decade with the use of the Internet. When we all started in business, it was mass marketing and everything, and you didn't have that kind of open exchange or interaction with the customer like you have today with the Internet. And so people say, well, the managers no longer have control over their brand, and they worry about how customers, when they get online and talk about your brand, can damage your brand. And it's a different world that we're living in today. But my feeling is that because of the Internet and because the interactive characteristics of social media, and it results in some new requirements for good branding. Probably the first and foremost is transparency and integrity. You just can't pull the wool over the customer anymore. You just have to be as honest as you possibly can, and you're going to be called on if you're not. And I think that's really healthy. Another important aspect that comes out of this new Internet world is the fact that you have to be really much more diligent in creating a value proposition that is truly distinct and truly relevant. And this is a world that it's much more competitive, and that's why creativity and ideation is so important for understanding what customers like, what turns them on, what will become buzzworthy and they'll share. So I think it's a lot of this new world has forced marketers to become more proficient in developing better brands, I think, in order to succeed or even survive in the future.
Yeah, I love that, and I like the piece about immediacy, right? Your brand, it's not this. You don't have time anymore to come up with this big brand plan as to what's going to be happening, because day to day people are talking about your brand, and you need to be on top of all of that, because if you're not managing it, then all of a sudden the brand is in the hands of everyone else. Right,
exactly.
And so having these two-way conversations is critical. I have a story that last year I was on a flight from from Miami to Buenos Aires, a midnight flight, and got on the plane, sitting there, literally fell asleep in the seat, woke up thinking we were in Buenos Aires, and we were still on the ground at 5 in the morning in Miami. And we woke up because the flight attendant said, "Oh, we have to cancel this flight because now we're past our flying time. We can't fly for that long." So had to get on the next day flight. And American Airlines booked me. I was in business. They had booked me on an economy class flight. I called the executive platinum desk. They wouldn't do anything for me. I put a note on the American Airlines Facebook page, and within a second, I was upgraded to first. And I give them a lot of credit, right, because I went over the top talking about how incredibly quick they were to solve my problem and go above and beyond. But that's the kind of thing where the immediate response to not have the brand dragged through the mud because of some mistake on their part is just so powerful.
Oh, it really is. And see, I think this interaction capability offers good opportunities for marketers who are aware of the risks but are also aware of the potential. If a manager hears or listens to some complaints, they should address it immediately. And once they do, I think most consumers out there appreciate that, and they're more likely to share that information with other people. And there's nothing as powerful as word of mouth. And so I think it's a good opportunity to create loyal customers when you do respond to them and address their problems or their questions.
Yeah, and you know what I love what you just said is a manager, right? So it's no longer just the marketing department and their responsibility, right? Because the issue that could be being made public could be customer service, it could be a sales issue. So really every employee today has a role in building and maintaining the brand.
Exactly. It's traditionally you think of roles like marketing or sales or customer service. They all have to be integrated now. They all have to be aware of what the brand means and how to manage it and how to excite their customers and create loyal customers. They all have to be working together. And that's hard because, people have liked to be in their fixed roles traditionally, but it's up to senior management to really bring them together, and it requires a lot of training and education.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and I think that's the key thing, right, because there are all these different touch points that we have with a company, right? We go to their website, we go into their store, we experience their product, we get their product delivered to us on the web, we might be touching their promotional material. All these different things come from different parts of the company, yet each one of them needs to deliver the brand promise so that there's no incongruence and that we all know what the brand's about. What are the strategies today for making that consistent experience happen, knowing that the touch points are pretty much spread throughout the entire organization?
Well, I think it is strategic, and it really requires companies to get everybody together and train them and have them understand what that business is all about and really drill down and make sure that they implement it that way. It's just really an educational process. And I think that another part of it that's really important that's emerged with branding is the importance of the emotional side of branding. It's just not what you do for the customer. It's also today more important on how you want your customer to feel about your brand. And that can only be done if everybody who is exposed to the customer in any way realizes what those personality, those intangibles are about the brand, and is able to convey that to their customer.
Yeah, I think that's what's really important. And now we have all these people in companies also using social media, and in some instances they are representatives of the brand, right? And whether they're de facto representatives or they just happen to be ambassadors of the brands working in companies. And we have lots of millennials who are joining companies because of their connection with that emotional value that the brand delivers, right? They want to work for this company because of X. How is this new millennial generation impacting the way companies build their brands?
Well, it's fascinating. The millennials are anyone born after 1980, and it's an entirely different generation because they grew up with the Internet. And they're elusive, they're hard to work with, they're demanding, but their influence is incredible. And I think every company has to be aware of that. They're scratching their heads and trying to figure out how to work with them, but they're a whole different breed. I mean, they are so cynical and skeptical of advertising, for example. I've read statistics where only 5% of them trust advertising. 95% say trust is the most important ingredient for buying a product. And that trust comes from communicating with their peers or friends online. That's the basis of their purchase decision. So their behavior is dominated by social media and other internet vehicles. That's what drives them, and that's going to happen in the future as well. So as a result, what you do is you have the means to communicate that is so pervasive in our society, driven by these millennials. But the key is, what are they going to say? What are you going to tell these millennials that's going to really excite them? So the content or the message is just critical, and that it requires good branding, different ways to express your brand, good new hooks on their brand message, and that's really important to make it buzzworthy, because that's what's going to drive the behavior and success in the future. The millennials are really powerful these days.
Yes, absolutely. So let me just pause for a moment to let everyone know you're listening to the November Reach Personal Branding interview series. We have Jay Gronlund talking to us about the basics of branding. And if you wanted to learn more about Jay, you could go to www.thepathfindergroup.net. Okay. Let's go back to emotion, because you were talking about emotion, and clearly, it's not about delivering the rational brand attributes anymore, because essentially there are other people who can do it, right? So it's those emotional connections that allow us to develop trust with a company and to become ambassadors for those companies. And one of the trends that's happening that's creating even stronger emotional ties is companies and the causes they support. And this whole social element of giving back and what we're about, we have a bigger mission than just providing our products, right? Can you talk a little bit about that and the impact of that on branding strategy?
Yeah, that's really interesting. First of all, on the emotional part of it, neuroscientists have done a lot of studies and research on how the brain works, and there's this one part of the brain called the limbic part that absorbs. That's the subconscious part of the brain that absorbs all the emotions, and they have concluded that behavior is determined by that part of the brain, all the emotions or subconscious thoughts that go in. So what that means is it's not the rational part of the brain, but all these the emotions that we are filtered or driven into our brain, absorbed when we're exposed to things like design or color or ads. I mean, there's thousands of them every day that are absorbed there, and you don't think about it, but it's these emotions that dictate, what we're going to buy and other forms of behavior. So emotional branding is really critical. And when you get into one step beyond where branding is heading in the future, is what you described, going beyond the emotion, because it may not be enough, especially for the millennials, something called purposeful branding. And what that means is that millennials are very savvy. They look at the company behind the brand. They make judgments on what that company stands for, and they are positively influenced if a company has are more community-minded, more environmental-minded. They have a reputation or image for helping the world become a better place to live. So it goes beyond the emotions today for a lot of global brands, especially like Dove, for example. They deal with the realities of women, but that's where it's heading. And the millennials are turned on by that, and so it's really important for companies to keep in mind what their brand image is and what they stand for and represent, especially in the minds of the millennials. William, there?
Yes, sorry about that. Can you talk more about companies that are doing that are connecting what they do with purpose?
Well, it's like the American Express is a good example. They have a lot of programs that are devoted for, the community at large. A lot of them are involved in the climate. The Body Shop, for example, is an example of they built their business on natural ingredients. It's good for the environment. I think IBM and General Electric are companies that have a strong reputation in that area. It's all about building a better life, and that appeals to the millennials. It really does, and that's the powerful engine for the future.
Yes, and it's not only as consumers, but also as the organizations that they want to work for.
Oh yes, that's it's amazing, and you probably know this so much better because personal branding uses the same principles. But the key question is, what can I offer? What's the best fit for me ultimately, depending on my passions, my interests, and my capabilities? And more want a company like a Google that is innovative. They stand for it's a great place to work. They understand the millennials. They listen to them. It's an office environment where they can really thrive in. So I think that's really important as a destination for these younger millennials.
Yeah, so let's talk about the distinction between branding and positioning. A lot of people can confound those. Can you share with us your thoughts around that?
Well, they're really close, and one leads to the other. Positioning is like a blueprint. I emphasize in my course at NYU the importance of a positioning statement because it forces you to first focus on the customer and what they're looking for, what's interesting to them, and then come up with a benefit and the reasons to believe that promise. And I think once you have a description of how your product or service or even a person or a company or a country is distinct from competition and is relevant, offers something that's really of interest to the consumer, answering these needs, that's your blueprint. What branding is more about, branding is really brings the positioning alive. It gives it a personality because, as I said, branding is all about connecting with people, and people don't connect with things, they connect with people. And if they see a brand as a personality with certain characteristics that they like, that they warm to, that they feel comfortable with, that they trust, they're going to be connected with them. So brand is really an extension of a positioning statement. Positioning is the description or the blueprint, and branding is the personality that's going to attract customers.
Great. Thanks for clearing that up. It's definitely something that we, in the world of branding, we deal with that all the time. I know you're a big believer in customer research and its impact on being able to deliver on your brand and to essentially build that brand in the marketplace. Talk a little bit about that.
It's interesting. The whole field of research is changing so much. I mean, there's this big question about big data and whether that is whether traditional research is really required anymore, or because companies can just go online and Google this and get so much information, it's unbelievable. Well, big data is a reality, but the challenge is interpreting that data, understanding what it means, what the implications are, and making sense out of it. And that's not easy, and so you really need experienced marketers or researchers to be able to do that. But the bottom line is that everybody knows that marketing starts with a customer, but today there are really great research techniques that can get into the customer's mind and heart more cost efficiently, like online research or chat rooms and things like that. But you have areas like B2B, which always relied on feedback from their salespeople to understand the customer, and it's just not good enough. You really have to get into the customer's mind and heart and understand what drives those purchase decisions, what they like, what are those key customer insights that's going to change your whole marketing practice, your appeal to them. So I think research has become much more important. You have to be much more diligent and with probing and to get these key customer insights. And, you have to expand that into fields like B2B, and there's a lot to learn from the B2C area of marketing in that B2B area, especially how to become more customer-focused and learn more about customer usage and buying decisions.
Yeah, this whole concept of big data, right? And they're huge tech companies that have sprung up in California that can take huge volumes of data and essentially tell a company what's going on with them from the perspective of their customers, right? It's a whole new field that didn't exist only a few years ago, but I think for big companies, it's really a powerful tool. How can so we have a lot of people on the line today who are individual solopreneurs or entrepreneurs. How can people who don't have a budget of $10 million to do research like IBM, how can they do research to understand what their clients think and how to be more relevant to them?
Well, it's interesting because in my class at NYU, I have a few entrepreneurs, and they ask the same question, and I just discussed this with them that, you take focus groups, which is probably the most common form of research, but, it's not cheap. You have a whole series of focus groups that can add up to like, $30,000, $40,000 for, say, half a dozen focus groups, and these small companies don't have that kind of money, but you can get a lot of information from basically from online too. You can go into these chat rooms on a certain category or product and learn about what people like, what their problems are. You can talk with them online. Online surveys, even quantitative, are very reasonable. You can get online with a panel of people for about $8,000 to $10,000, and with 20 questions, you can learn an awful lot. And that's with a sample size that's big enough to be projectable, so it's quantitative. Or even just going out and getting thought leaders and talking to them on the phone. It's not projectable, but you can get great insights on trends and what drives people in certain categories. There's lots of ways to get feedback, but it's critical that they do something. The worst thing they can do is, and this is true with a lot of entrepreneurs, is that they think they know the customer. They have great products, they've invented them, and they say, well, look at this, the customer will definitely love it. It's just not going to happen. It's not the reality, and they're making a big mistake if they don't go out and get some kind of feedback from customers. I did a seminar a couple of years ago up at Cambridge with grads from MIT who are all inventors. I mean, they had these extraordinary products, and the headline of my flyer, I think, said it all, and it said, "You got a great product, now forget it. It ain't enough." Meaning, they're so obsessed with what they've invented, but they still have to realize that customers have to like it as well and see it as a way that it's going to benefit them, and then how to market and build the business. So getting customer feedback through some kind of research, and there are a lot more inexpensive ways today, is absolutely essential.
Yeah, I have to say one of the things we do at Reach, and we're a tiny little company, we send a feedback request for after every sale of anything we do. So whether it's our certification programs or 360 Reach or whatever it is, we just send out a quick survey. And sure, does everyone complete it? No, but love with what we do, or people who've encountered a problem and need to let us know about it, let us know, and it's unbelievably valuable for us. It really tells us either we're on the right track or abandon this quickly. So something as simple as that can be really helpful. I know we certainly love feedback from our clients.
Just on that, William, I read a survey a couple years ago that said for each customer complaining, there are 26 others who have similar problems. 6 of those have a serious problem, and also 96% of people who have had a brand experience won't complain. So you have to realize that every little customer complaint is like the tip of the iceberg, and you have to address it. You have to understand it, because there's a lot more beneath the surface that can be high risk. So even something as simple as a consumer survey after what you do is so important.
Yeah, and I have to say, sometimes we learn something that we would never have come up with ourselves. We wouldn't even consider asking the question, and somehow someone provides us with an insight, and it becomes our next big, feature in a product or something. So it really is, I think if you look at it in a different way, it really is involving your client base in product development.
Absolutely, and new ideas are really critical. It was a survey a couple of years ago by IBM among 1,500 CEOs around the world, and the question was, going forward, what is the most important attribute you need to be successful? The number one, creativity. They just have to, they realize that the old model just isn't working anymore after this long economic recession, that they have to think out of the box. They have to come up with new ideas and be more innovative, to create a culture of innovation like Google does. I mean, Google mandates every employer to spend 20% of their time thinking about new ideas. So, and what's the best source for new ideas? It's the customer itself. And that's why, another reason why that kind of feedback is so critical.
Yeah, and by the way, this is where I see, this is what gets me really excited, is this is where I see the connection between the corporate brand and the personal brand. Because when you have a company, if you're willing to let your employees be their brand and be what makes them great, then that's the most diverse workforce you can have. And diversity supports creativity, which leads to innovation, and every organization today needs to be innovating or they're going to be out of business. Right, and innovating even faster than ever before, because the number of new entrants in the marketplace and the speed of change is increasing. Absolutely,
and as you know, I facilitate ideation sessions, and I've written a lot on this, and it's a big section in my book on this. A lot of people think, well, you just throw some people in a room for a couple of hours and brainstorm, and you come out with great ideas. Well, it needs a lot more than that, and it's much more important to that it requires a more of a long-term effort. But one of the aspects, one of the things you want to do is get a mix of people in the room, and definitely have younger people, because they're not fixed in their ways or their thinking, and they're so wide open, and that's a great source of new ideas, these millennials, because they don't care about breaking rules. I mean, they'll say anything, and it's so constructive to have these people, that kind of fresh, vibrant attitude and answers in a room. So you're absolutely right. Personal branding should really encourage companies to take advantage of this resource and build on that. The younger people are critical for this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Let's just pause for a moment to let everyone know this is the Reach Personal Branding interview series for November. We're talking with Jay Gronlund about the basics of branding, and you can learn more about him at www.thepathfindergroup.net. and you'll be able to get a link to his book. So let's continue, and a lot of what we've been talking about, I think companies and people stress out about, right? They say, gosh, I need to be innovating more. I need to realize that my brand is actually held in the hearts and minds of all the people who touch my brand, and I need, it's not self-contained, and I need to be on top of all these things, and it can seem overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, I have so much more to do, where's the opportunity? And I think at the same time, having a strong brand has this incredible impact and power for you to be able to actually increase visibility and revenue globally, right? Because every business today is a global business. We can all do business over the internet, which is an amazing opportunity, especially when you have a strong brand. So can you talk a little bit about that branding connection between having a strong brand and its potential impact globally and even in emerging markets?
Yeah, I as you know, I've done a lot of work helping companies expand in the foreign market, so I have experience with cross-border initiatives. But one aspect of it's interesting to hear you say, and it's absolutely right. I mean, companies have cut and it means that the people working there are overstressed, and they don't have enough time. They've been given more responsibilities, and it's just an awful lot of pressure. And when you think about companies today, what the thrust is that they may specialize in a particular area, or they focus on a product, and the whole effort is to make them more effective, make them better. And that's counterintuitive to ideation or innovation, because it's just the opposite. Innovation requires you to think out of the box, not within the box. But that's what the main driver is with companies, is to become better at what they do. So it's kind of a conundrum. But I think the opportunities abroad are so overpowering that you can't ignore it. And but even here, American companies, the global companies, do a great job, of course, because they've been international for a long time. But the smaller entrepreneurial companies, it's so tempting to say, well, I've been successful in the U.S., I'll take the same formula, the same approach, and put that into Brazil or China or Thailand or Poland or wherever it is. And they just don't realize that the cultural nuances can be so different that they really have to take a step back and understand what that culture is all about, what the competitive landscape is in that market, and do a lot of homework up front. But they're there. I mean, companies, these foreign countries love American products in general, but they only if they're willing to adapt to their local cultural norms. But I think the opportunities are so immense for any small, medium-sized company.
Yeah, I think, I have to say, even my business, we have REACH certified strategists in 41 countries around the globe, right? And so a presence in 41 countries, all doing it from one office in the U.S. And we're a small company, so you see the incredible potential for companies to be able to expand their business anywhere, which is something you could never do a few decades ago.
I did a couple workshops in Thailand last year. One was on positioning brands with social media. Another one was on ideation. And I was really impressed with their knowledge of the Internet. The Internet is so global, and their technical skills are as good as most in America, if not better in some cases. But what they lack is the strategic side of it, the marketing side of it, brand building and things like that, and also how to come up with new ideas. But so they have this. They recognize the U.S. as probably the greatest experts in marketing and brand building, and so they really welcome efforts from Americans to work with them and develop their businesses overseas.
Yeah, great point. Again, it goes back to the whole partnership opportunities and the ability to learn and grow because of the expertise and strengths of others, which is a real important reminder, right? Not to stay in our silo. And speaking about silos, we touched upon this a little bit earlier, but I'd like to talk about it in a little greater detail. And this is about the role of owning the brand, right? And the marketing people owned the brand, and the salespeople kind of knew what their role was, but there wasn't a lot of connection or collaboration, and the customer service people knew what their role was, and the product management people did. But I think all of those separations are now seeming more artificial, right? Because of the brand and the importance of brand, the walls are coming down among all those groups. What are your thoughts on that, and what do you know about organizations that are really able to kind of rid themselves of that silo mentality?
Well, it's interesting. It's a real problem with a lot of B2B companies because the responsibilities of sales and marketing, for example, have become blurred. And one of the main reasons is that they both have access to the Internet to learn about market trends and their customer and their category and things like that. And so they're using the same material, and there's an awful lot of pressure because, again, there's not enough time to do what they have to do. And so they they build walls around them, and they don't communicate with each other like they do anymore, like they did before. But it's become a problem, and we talked before about the importance of integrating these roles within a company, and that has to be the responsibility of a senior manager to coordinate that, and the communications has to improve. But this silo mentality has become a problem. And I think one of the reasons is lead generation. You get information about customers. Traditionally, it used to come from the marketing. You said manage the brand. Salespeople kind of take some of that away from the marketing people to preempt them and take the initiative using the information for lead generation. And they don't really take advantage of what the marketing people can offer. At the same time, marketing people probably can do a better job understanding what drives these salespeople and communicate with them and work with them to improve their performance. So it's a problem, but you have to get these people together and communicate better and coordinate their activities.
Yeah, well, and I think that the people who can do it, the organizations that can, will really just stand head and shoulders above their competition, right? Because, I mean, that's what's going to deliver a consistent brand experience in the marketplace, and everyone takes ownership of that and yet works together collaboratively to make it happen. And to build trust, right? We talked about trust really early in the conversation, and I'd like to go back to that because that's really what it's about, right, is once we build trust with an organization like Apple, for example, right, we expect that everything Apple does is perfect as soon as it's created. And I have to say that's, I'm a big Apple fan, and that's the case, and I downloaded the new version of their iOS, right, and it had some bugs, and it caused me some grief. And was it enough to break that trust? Probably not. But did it really kind of make me a little concerned about the brand? Absolutely. So can you talk a little bit more about this trust and how it's built and also how it's taken away?
Well, it's interesting because I've always emphasized the importance of emotional branding. And you dig deeper and you ask yourself, well, what particular emotions are so important? And my feeling is that by far trust is the most critical emotion. And trust is a function of many other emotions like integrity, reliability, consistency, credibility. It's just really that's so important. At the same time, you think about the level of trust today, and it's epidemic. It's awful. It's we know about Congress and government. We know about our CEOs of the world, the Wall Street people. I read some statistics. Rob Peterson in a blog of his that 38% of the people trust government officials, which was down from 52% just a year ago. CEOs is down to 43% from 50%. You have corruption around the world. We talked about cross-border expansion, and it's just natural for a local market to be suspicious and distrusting a foreign almost invasion or some products coming in. So it's a real problem, but it's so at the same time it's probably the most important emotion that companies want to build on. And so I think there's a real need for companies to measure and understand whether they do have a problem with trust. And fortunately, it can be measured metrically or quantitatively. You can do some research and get a base level and measure it going forward in the future as you initiate efforts to rebuild that trust. But trust is the biggest driver for consumer behavior, and it's also, of course, as we said, millennials are the least trusting, and they have a great influence on the rest of the population. So trust is and we talked about B2B, and one of the things that a lot of good companies are realizing now is that the importance of the company reputation or its brand image will go a long way for enhancing or restoring this trust. So for B2B, if customers recognize that a company is transparent, is honest, can deliver on their promises, and can be trusted, that will go a long way to developing a loyal customer.
Well, brilliantly said. Love that. And let's pause here to remind everyone we're here with Jay Gronlund speaking about branding on the Reach Personal Branding interview series for November. In a moment, Jay, we're going to open it up for questions that have come in to me and Ryan. But before we do that, anything we didn't cover that's just a burning branding topic that you wanted to share with the audience today?
Well, just as a follow-up on this concept of brand trust, which I think is really very, very important going forward, companies can, I think, acknowledge that there could be a problem and try to make some kind of effort to strengthen that brand trust. And it involves three things. A lot of companies just don't have a value proposition or their brand definition sharp yet. And so there's always improvement to, further define that so it's based on, what their target customer really wants today. And as you pointed out, the target customer, these things are changing so dramatically, so quickly these days, plus the competition. The second thing is to do better research to really understand these insights and what drives the consumers today. It's not just the quantity, but the quality of the research that offers a great opportunity. And thirdly, and perhaps most important, is ideation or creativity. You have to come up with ideas. There are ways to add hooks or different dimensions to your brand that's going to result in better content that will be shared by especially the millennials with their friends and peers. That's really important to develop better content. So the whole idea of content management or improving the message from these new ideas is certainly very important for rebuilding your trust.
Great. Thanks, and I'm glad we end on trust because it is so critical. So, Ryan, other questions that came in to you, and then I have some questions here for Jay.
Great. Yes, I did have another one come in, and this individual wants to know, what would you suggest, Jay, that I do to turn around any misconceptions that people have about my personal brand? And put another way, where should I start if I needed to go through some type of rebranding effort?
Well, you always start with a customer to really understand what those problems or misconceptions are, and you just can't ignore it. The worst thing you can do is just take it but not get back to the customer. And customers, even if they disagree with you, they will appreciate your effort to address their problem. And that will go a long way. And if it's done well, properly and with respect and honestly, that customer will begin to share that information, share that relationship and that encounter with his peers. And that's going to be buzzworthy, and it's going to really develop into more loyal customers for you. So the first step is to go back to the customer, understand them, address those problems, and then, use those insights to improve your brand, your message out there, what you're all about, what you can offer and promise to the customer.
Great, thanks, Jay. And then the other question that came in was more of a clarifying question. They said you mentioned purposeful and emotional branding, and are these two things that work separately, or do they work together? Do we need to focus on one or the other, or is it all-inclusive type branding that you meant by emotional and purposeful branding?
Well, they're separate, but they're connected. And I know that sounds confusing, but you need definitely a brand that evokes certain emotions, because that's what will drive behavior. And one of the emotions is respect and trust, as we said, and that is delivered by a company that actually does something for the world, for the environment, for the local community, things like that. So they're intertwined in that they're both based on emotion, but I think that, again, you depending on who you're talking to, if your target customer is a younger person, the idea of a purposeful benefit promise is even greater, because they're going to go beyond the emotions and ask themselves, can I feel comfortable, can I like the company behind this brand? Do I have the respect and trust for that company? So they're both derived from emotions, but and they're both very important. So, and I think they're connected in a way, and it's just the way the branding will be going in the future, especially with global brands and companies. I hope that clarifies.
Yeah, and to add to that, Jay, I think one thing that separates the companies who are doing great work around branding and purpose is that they really believe it. It's authentic, and everything they do is connected to it, and they like to hire people who embrace it, and they're doing it because they really believe it. I think of Tom's Shoes, right? Whereas there are lots of organizations out there that are pretending they have a purpose, right? And we can see right through it. Companies that say, subscribe to our email, and we don't want to print statements because we care about the environment. But we know they just care about the cost savings that come with that, and we don't really see them as organizations that are supporting the environment. So I think with everything in branding, right, it has to be real, because people can see through these kind of made up, I'm jumping on this new trend of purpose, so we're going to support children, and then, we're just going to pretend we do it. It really needs to be infused in the organization and be authentic, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, there's so much lip service. It's so easy for a company to say, oh, we're behind climate change, we're behind the environment and all that. But they have to do something, and, they can't pull the wool over the eyes of these younger people anymore. They're going to get online and ask them, what are you doing? Are you really genuine in this promise? Where's your authentic programs? You got to deliver on this promise. So you just can't pay lip service. You got to really do something about it. Absolutely right.
Great. And I think we have time for one more question. I got a question in, Jay, that said you talked about politics and the lack of trust. What happens when somebody defines your brand for you? So, for example, the Democrats have the brand of being overspending socialists, yet the data shows that Republicans have outspent Democrats consistently throughout history. So the reality doesn't match up with the perception, and that perception was created by others. How do you control that?
Well, it's really interesting. I wrote a blog recently on how the Republicans have always done a better job with these sound bites and these expressions or phrases. And good for them, but they don't really reveal the truth. Sarah Palin talking about death and things like that for the older people. It's just not true. And I think the Democrats have to do a better job, communicating with emotion, and also proving that what the facts are. It's really, I think, a missed opportunity by the Democrats that there's so much misunderstanding of what the truth is. They just have to do a better job educating the consumer, the public.
Yes. So their tactic needs to be consistent, authentic communications to counteract how their brand has been essentially created or spun by others.
Yeah, the Republicans do a better job spinning it, I think. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the substance to back it up, it's going to hurt. But initially, they're getting all the attention and controlling the emotions of a lot of people out there.
Yes. Okay, great. That was a good question and great response. Thank you, Jay. We are thrilled we had the opportunity to get to dispel some of these myths around branding and really talk about where branding is going. I'm sure everyone's mind is spinning with how this impacts them, either as a personal brand or as the brand of a business owner or a careerist working inside a company. So we thank you, Jay, for your wisdom and taking the time to share with us. As a reminder to everyone, is there a direct link to your book, Jay?
Yeah.
Or they can just go to Amazon, right?
Go to Amazon. It's right on there, and everything we talked about is in there. And it, as you know, I've been teaching this course on positioning and brand development at NYU since 1999. So a lot of that material is in there, plus other things about branding for B2B and ideation and things like that. So it's again, it's purposely designed for the basic principles. It's used at bookstores. I know NYU has it available as well, their bookstore.
Great. Well, thank you, Jay. We look forward to part 2 when we go branding, advanced branding with your next book. So thanks again. Thank you, Ryan, and thanks all of you for being here on the line with us today for the November Reach Personal Branding Interview Series. We look forward to catching up with you next month with our next series, and know that we put the audio for all of our personal branding interviews at personalbranding.tv. So you can check out those audios and all of the videos we have there. So thanks to everyone, and we look forward to, thanks again, Jay. Look forward to connecting next month.